So first of all, thank you so much for being here today for this panel on taking up space. We've got four incredible speakers that I'm going to be chatting to, and I'm really excited for the conversation. I'm just going to introduce my panelists very briefly, because I'm sure they can do a better job of introducing themselves than I could. But we have Jonathan Wakeham. Thanks so much for being with us today, Jonathan. Jonathan is a screenwriter and is co-founder of the London Comedy Film Festival. He recently wrote Misanthrope, or To Catch a Killer, which is an intense crime thriller. And whatever the setting, he writes characters full of empathy and heart. So we're super excited to have him talking to us today. Jonathan is also a mentor with Arts Emergency and a former trustee, so he is a friendly face to a lot of us. So yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for being here.
Thank you.
We all
It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad. We also have Korantema, who is a curator from London. Korantema brings into her role a rich background of her community engagement, social justice, and youth work. Her creative endeavours are always centred around themes of home, identity, and storytelling. At the heart of her work lies Black Hair Stories, a project she spearheads. Currently, she serves as senior curator of the Horniman Museum and is a trustee of the East End Women's Museum. And a lot of you will know her as she was formerly Arts Emergency's head of community and worked very closely with us last year on the Youth Collective. So personally, I'm really chuffed to be speaking to her today.
Thanks, Amy.
Next, we have Silé, who is a literary agent based in London. She has worked for some of the country's biggest publishers, including Curtis Brown and the Publishers Association. Silé is currently a literary agent for Andrew Nernberg Associates, and she is a former Young Community member and a current member and trustee for Arts Emergency, so also has a lovely, rich history with us. Hey, Silé. And finally, last but by no means least, we have Yomi, who is a multi-award-winning journalist, has been a columnist at The Guardian and The iPaper. In 2018, she co-authored the best-selling book Slay in Your Lane, The Black Girl Bible, for which she was named a Marie Claire Future Shaper. And last year, also published your debut novel, The List, which I am yet to read, but very excited to read. I have heard so much praise from my friends. So yeah, super, super happy that we have you. And we have everybody here today. It's going to be a great panel. I'm really excited to kick off.
Thank you, Amy.
So to start with, guys, that was a very whistle-stop introduction to each of you, and I'm sure there's so much you could say about yourselves that I haven't said. So my first question would be, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently working on? And I'm going to go in order of who's on my screen. So Jonathan, if you want to kick us off.
Hi, thanks, Amy. Yeah, so I'm a writer for film and TV, and I'm currently doing a series called Mind Reader, which is a kind of technological thriller about surveillance and identity and neurotechnology. And I think, so I love anything that has a lot of research involved. So I just wrote a movie called Midas Man that was about Brian Epstein, who was the Beatles manager. And that was a lovely year kind of diving into the history and the sociology and the politics of the 60s. This is all about brain science. I kind of love diving into history and technology and science and sociology and politics behind the story. But I think probably like a lot of people, that can easily become my reason to procrastinate from actually writing the script because I'm enjoying doing the research so much. But that's the key thing for the next few months.
Thank you. Korantema, do you want to go next?
Yes. So yeah, I'm one of the curators at the Horniman Museum, which is a museum in South London. A very eclectic museum. It's got a farm and a butterfly house and an aquarium. So if you're ever in South London, do go, it's very fun. And what I'm working on at the moment is the museum has done some work around repatriation, which is sending objects back from where they were stolen. So I'm working on our Nigerian collection, designing like a display with other Nigerian creatives, and that will open in December. So that's the main thing that I do. But I work part-time, so I work 2.5 days a week, and then the other 2.5 days a week I do freelancing, so lots of different kinds of projects around London. Yeah.
Are you working on anything interesting, like freelance-wise at the minute?
So actually right now I'm in a dance studio library because I'm doing a project. So I dance freelance, and we're doing a show next Saturday, about a really incredible jazz dancer, and it's her like live archive. So that's what I'm currently doing.
That sounds super interesting, and I guess a way to take up space in a very literal, physical way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. Silé, what are you up to?
Currently trying to find the mute button. Is that it? I can never really talk about what I'm up to. I hate this question so much because everything I'm up to, Yomi's laughing because she's definitely going to say like the same thing. Everything I'm up to, I can't talk about until probably next year, and then it won't even come out until 2026 probably, because that's the publishing works a couple of years in advance. But I did decide I was going to bring some books for show and tell because this is kind of the best way to describe what I do. So this book is coming out later this month, and it is a very, very cool Formula One romance. And this book just came out. It's a narrative nonfiction. It's called Harpy, a Manifesto for Child-Free Women. So it's basically about, as a woman, what your life might be like if you choose not to have children. And I think my camera just disappeared for some reason, so I can't do the last one. But my last one is a cookbook called Desified, which is essentially a cookbook for Ramadan. So recipes for Ramadan, Eid, and everything in between, by Zainuddin, and it's amazing. It came out last month, so all of the books I work on is kind of exemplified in those three. It's a real range. No two are really the same, but usually done 2, maybe even 3 years in advance. So anything I'm working on now will be out in the next couple of years.
That's super interesting to know. Yeah. Gosh, how do you feel about having to, sort of like it's such a long lifespan, right? Like if you're working on things now that aren't coming out for the next couple of years, like how do you see that through to completion?
I think I'm just kind of used to it. It's very, very normal in publishing to have timelines like that, where you start working on something, you have an idea, and you start kind of planning it with the author, then you get the deal, you start working on it with the editor and the publishing house, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. So I very rarely think about the fact that I can't talk about it. It's only when people ask me a question like this, or the other one, which is, what are you reading at the moment? And I'm like, well, nothing. I'll tell you, and it's going to sound really great, and then you're going to want to read it, and you won't be able to forget about it by the time it's actually public information. So it is fairly normal, especially in creative industries where you're making an end product that's like a film or a book or even an article. Sometimes you get commissioned to write an article. Yomi, again, will probably tell you months and months in advance, and then it comes out and everyone's really excited about it, and you're already writing or conceiving the next thing. So it is fairly normal. I think I've been doing it for years now, so I think I'm just fairly used to it, and not usually as well, you don't want to announce something or talk about it because it changes so much over the course of development. So I'm never kind of sat there going, oh, I wish I could talk about it, because usually there's so much else to focus on before it gets to that point.
Sure. Jonathan, you're sort of nodding your head there. Is there anything in your experience as a screenwriter that kind of rings true in that way?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I think as Silé said, it's very similar in film and TV in that generally, there can be years of development work and different scripts and different writers and I think that certainly with film and TV, it's a kind of don't count your chickens business, in that, there's never a moment where it can't go wrong until it's literally on the screen in front of people at the premiere. But also, there were people who had films released like on 9/11. There were people who had films released during the pandemic, so there's never a moment where our external events can't affect the thing that you're working on. So, and again, we have to do a lot of work in secrecy. I mean, this show I'm doing now is an unusual one in that it was kind of announced quite early, but normally, you're hiding away for 2 years before anybody sees anything.
As somebody that's like, you know, I'm interested, obviously, avid consumer of books, TV, everything. It's really interesting to know that, because I feel like I always had an inkling that obviously you have to plan very far in advance. But yeah, to hear about it from you guys that are actually in it is, yeah, it's a different perspective for sure. Yomi, do you want to tell us what you're up to at the minute? I feel like you're very, very busy, it seems.
Yeah, I have been very busy. So I just want to say also it's really nice to like see everyone. I haven't been able to see like some of your lovely faces in a really long time, because the past year I have been, God, I mean the past 3 years I've been working on my book that came out last year. But as Silé perfectly put, like the run up is, it's such a sort of long distance between writing and publication, and came out last year. Paperback came out like maybe 2 weeks ago, and I've been like running around trying to sort of do stuff around that. So it's been a very hectic kind of blur of a period. And it's weird to finally be talking about working on something else that isn't this like first book. So I was working on it for so long, but technically kind of still is the first book, because one of the things I'm working on is the TV adaptation of the list. As Jonathan said, like you really can't kind of, you know, I'm very much crossing my fingers and toes and hoping that everything goes fine, because it's very much, you know, in its primordial stages. We're still like working on the pilot, but it's really exciting, and it's, yeah, it's like early stages, but also, as Jonathan said, it's not really normal to have things like announced way ahead in advance, but it was announced before I'd even finished the book, because it was purchased whilst I was still writing it. So that's been, it's weird because I'm kind of talking about something different, but it's still part of that, you know, universe. And I'm also working on my second book, which again probably won't be out until 2026, maybe 2027. I'm like maybe a third of the way through that, but that's been really nice because it's just great to talk about, you know, something that is different. It's been a nice change. So yeah, those are the two things that I'm doing right now.
Thank you so much. Is your second book another fiction, or is it more of a non-fiction? Another fiction?
It's another fiction.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's like, it's interesting because I was a non-fiction writer for so many years, and Silé knows very much how difficult I found writing fiction the first time, and how, you know, I picked her brain a lot in terms of just advice and help with writing that first novel. And I only honestly did want to write for one. I had this one idea that I wanted to kind of, you know, write about and speak about within the fiction space. But then I got a 2-book deal, which is always a blessing, and like I was very excited about, but it just means that it's been a slightly different process, because I guess with the list, I was like, I know I want to write this thing. Whereas with the second book, it's like, yeah, I kind of had to work slightly more at like, you know, creating it. And the first book was really hard enough. So it's been a journey, but I've just hit that like small window of enjoyment where you're actually like really kind of on a roll, which is nice. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I'm enjoying it whilst I have it.
Yeah, ride the wave while you can.
Exactly that.
When you said as well that the sort of option and stuff came through for the list sort of adaptation as you were writing it, how did that feel to, you know, have that interest there already?
You know what? It's such a difficult one, because it's like, on the one hand, it was like the best thing that ever happened in my life. It was so affirming and so exciting. And like, you know, I talk about my parents a lot because they have just, more than myself, I'd say, in this, they have just been so bowled over by like what's been happening, and they're so excited about it. So they were like completely amazed. My mum watches a lot of HBO. She like loves like The Sopranos and like like The Wire and stuff. So she was like, oh my God, HBO, that's amazing. But then I will say, just being completely honest, it was really, really exciting. But I was on chapter 9 and I had about maybe like 20 more chapters to write. And part of me did worry, honestly, like, what if the first 9 chapters have been a fluke and they were like great, and then I write like 20 more chapters of rubbish? Like, that was just a consistent thought process. So I was like, okay, there's the pressure of actually having to deliver a book that is, you know, because for anyone that's not aware, usually you have to, with a fiction book, you know, complete the manuscript before it's you know, bought. So having it be bought on a partial, it just made me, it felt like a lot of pressure initially, because I felt like, God, what if the rest you know, I wrote it in very specific circumstances. It was lockdown. You know, I had nowhere else to go. I had nothing else to do. So then when I was writing the rest of it, I was like, God, what if I can't deliver? And then to have to do a TV show off the back of that with like 3 really big companies, it just felt like I'd wake up every day and kind of have like a bit of anxiety, just like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing to do. And if I don't deliver, it's like now not just the book, it's the TV show. Very grateful that it's all like gone to plan, but it was an anxious time, I won't lie. I was excited, but I mean, anxiety and excitement are kind of like 2 sides of the same coin in many ways. So yeah, it was mixed, but I think once it was just out, the sigh of relief was like heard across the world. I was just so happy to be done with it.
This actually kind of relates to some questions we've had from young people already, but when you were talking about that sort of very pressurizing, anxious time, like what was it that got you through it to get you actually to see the book to the end and to, you know, have that sort of belief that, you know, you can do this, you can write this book, and it's going to be great? Because I imagine that, you know, you obviously don't feel like that all the time because self-doubt is so natural and it's so pervasive. But yeah, just I guess it's good to know, like, what is it that actually grounded you?
So I'd say like with my first books, I used to co-write books with my best friend, Elizabeth Uvebenene. We co-wrote a book called Slay in Your Lane in 2018. And I'd say originally, like one of the biggest fears I had around writing a book on my own was a lack of accountability and someone to provide that inspiration and just keep you going. Me and Elizabeth used to have down days and shifts because it was like, oh, you're allowed to feel rubbish on a Monday, I'll feel rubbish on a Tuesday, because one of us was always on, even if the other one was off. And that was really great. And when I was writing on my own, I was like, God, now I don't have Elizabeth. I don't have someone to kind of like, you know, bat ideas back and forth with and work things out. That being said, I realized you don't necessarily need a co-author to do that. Again, don't want to embarrass Silé, but she was one of the people who like was very, she's in my acknowledgements of the book because she was one of the first like readers, one of the first believers in the list as a book. And I did speak to her a lot about, you know, my anxieties and my ideas and XYZ. I spoke to my sister, who's also a journalist. My older sister's a journalist at BBC News. BBC News Africa. I spoke to her about a lot of stuff. I still spoke to Elizabeth. I spoke to my friends and my community, and it really was so important because writing, as anyone will know, like it can be a very lonely process. And I'm sure Jonathan knows that when it comes to TV, it's more collaborative and it's slightly more like, you know, there's a lot more back and forth, I feel, and a bit more like camaraderie. But I think with books, it can be really tunnel vision, and just you kind of just feel like you're shouting into the void on your own. So I really struggled with that, but I'd say I found a lot of confidence in my friends and my community. And I think I was concerned as well initially that my friends would just pretend they loved everything I was writing because they were my friends, but they were invested in this being good. So they were actually really quite brutal, which was really useful. They were really honest and it was really helpful. So I'm always saying, like, you know, in the list, the book, it works on a countdown clock, and it kind of like, you know, there's a wedding involved and each chapter goes down to, you know, it's like counts down to each day to the wedding, and loads of people love that. And I'm like, that's off the back of a conversation I had with Silé. Like literally we were on a Zoom and she was like, well, have you thought of doing this? And I was like, no, I definitely hadn't. And I think, yeah, community is super important, just in terms of not just keeping you accountable, but just really making you feel like you can actually do the thing, because there are going to be lots of times, I think 90% of, you know, me writing the book post lockdown was me being like, I actually can't finish this. And I'm feeling exactly like that again with book 2. So it doesn't really go away, I don't think.
Yeah, I really relate to that in terms of, you know, I think myself because I'm quite early in my career in what I want to do. Like I feel like I'm definitely getting better at actually like having that self-confidence and realizing that, you know, okay, I can do this. But I think that it is unfortunately always going to be there in some way or another. But I think you're so right. Like the role of community and actually having your people around you is like so pivotal to actually sort of grounding yourself. Like when we were leading up to this panel, each of us in the youth collective like did a little mini definition of what taking up space means to us. And for me, when I was writing it, I didn't really think about it. But then when I was reading it back, I was like, I actually mentioned a lot like the importance of like knowing your people and finding your people and sort of like who you can help and who can help you, and realizing that a lot of taking up space is actually like sometimes we see it in quite an individualized lens, like assert your right to be here, have a seat at the table. But actually, it's often about who else is sat around the table and who is with you in your journey. So I guess my next question would be in that vein, what's the importance of community to you and to networks, and how have they sort of shaped where you are now? Korantema, can I go to you first? Let's put you on the spot.
Sure. I feel like it's literally everything. I have so many WhatsApp groups filled with people from sort of the different parts of my life. I mean, actually, even yesterday we have one, it's called Chaotic Good, which I think is very on brand for what this WhatsApp group is like. But it was popping because we're just talking about like weird work HR situations. And I feel like sometimes you just need people to be like, does this feel a bit weird to you? Or does this seem a bit, And then you just need to be like, have that affirmation from people in community to be able to like give you the confidence to actually be able to go into like your workplace, or it might even be your workplace, it might just be like a life situation, and yeah, have the confidence to call something out or stand up for yourself or like not give in to something. I just feel like it's really, really important to have your gang around you. And like where did that come from? I think maybe in some stages of like my career I felt quite lonely, I think. And I feel like probably like a lot of people have felt a bit like one of the only ones, or you're not really sure whether you should be there, or you feel a bit like unwelcome. And in times like that, it has been like drawing on other people, like forcing friendship on people as well. So like just to have like that network around you. Like, I remember I went to Durham University in the north of England, and I didn't know anyone else who was going, and it was a very, very white uni, and there was a Nigerian society, but I'm not Nigerian, so I didn't join. And like, no shade on me, obviously, but I was like, I'm not Nigerian, I'm Ghanaian, I'm not Nigerian. So I felt like I actually didn't have like a lot of, I didn't see like have a lot of Black people around me, and that actually really, really affected me. So when I left uni, I was like on a rampage. I was like, I need to find the Black creative people who I can be friends with, who I can make stuff with, who I can ask for advice. And yeah, I think a lot of that came from, those sort of 3 years being there. But it's been really useful today. And I think a lot of the time, I mean, you're saying this, Amy, you feel like you have to do it alone, but actually you don't. And it's much easier when you don't.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What did you study at Durham, out of interest?
So I started off with archaeology, and I lasted about 3 weeks, and then I switched to anthropology.
Okay.
Which was, I did social and biological anthropology. And to be honest, I didn't think it was going to get me anywhere, but weirdly, I've sort of been a full circle because now I'm a curator of anthropology is my specific title. Yeah, so it's quite broad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as someone that also did archaeology at Durham, I can attest that anthropology is the cooler of the two. Don't know how I took it out, but yeah, thank you so much for sort of musing on that a little bit. I think a lot of people that asked questions before this event wanted to know how to navigate the minefield that is networking, particularly expressing yourself in spaces where you feel like you don't belong, or you're quite shy, or sort of situations that feel quite overwhelming, in terms of like the balance between selling yourself and actually taking care of yourself and coming across as authentic. I guess, does anybody have any advice on that? I mean, Silé, do you have anything you could maybe speak to? Sorry, I feel like I'm picking on each of you.
Yeah, I was so hoping you wouldn't pick me for this one, because this is actually one that I don't know if we're going to get into the specific questions later, so I don't want to kind of overlap, but there's one specific question that someone asked that I read to my fiance, because I was like, how do I answer this? Because I literally do not put myself in this situation very deliberately, because I hate it. And when I do, I find myself almost creating a persona, and I'll like pretend to be so, and sometimes it goes too far. Like someone will ask me a very specific question, and I'm like, well, now I have to lie, and now I can never see this person again, because I haven't just moved here from Birmingham, and I'm just like, so and I get myself into these like borderline rom-com level situations where it's just like, why have you, like, one day I was in Morrison's, this really lovely woman started talking to me, and she looked at my daughter and she went, "Oh, how old's your son?" And I was like, 2. Yeah, he's just had to. Oh, when's his birthday? Bear in mind, my daughter. When's his birthday? Oh yeah, late July. She's born in April. Like, I really don't know what I was doing. I just got so flustered that it just started. I was like, what? And then I saw her again.
Can I
I
ask you a
had to like run
Can I ask you-
because
do
she's
you find
walking around thinking I've got this son born in July that I just simply don't. So I think the moral of all of that is to kind of know your limits. And like, there are some situations you will end up in by nature of the job you do, or, you know, I do a lot of networking that's kind of casual networking because I'll be in rooms with editors or publishing people that I don't know, so I kind of have to talk to them. And I think the most important thing is to be comfortable enough within yourself to know that when you're in very specific situations that you can handle them, and then just don't put yourself in situations that you don't feel like you can handle. And I know that's a really, really like kind of vague, unhelpful answer, but I literally was talking about this question yesterday, just going, how the hell do I give them an answer? Because I still haven't worked it out. If I ever do, I'll come back and I'll let you know.
Thank you. A good answer in itself, in the sense that, you know, it's something that is really hard to sort of crack, and I think knowing your limits is the key thing that came out of that, is something that we all do need to know a little bit, because I feel like I definitely am still learning that. I think I have a tendency to push myself beyond my limits, and then I feel like very drained afterwards, which is not ideal. I wonder, have any of you actually gone to like formalized networking events, or does it just kind of like happen? Does anyone want to speak about their experience with networking?
I think while everyone gets ready for this question, I have actually been to them, and I went to a lot of them. And that's kind of where this came from, because this like reluctance to do them, because I only really found them helpful in situations where it was, so when I was a young person, when I was kind of 17 to 19, wanting to get into the industry, and they were very specifically other young people with industry professionals, those were really helpful. But then kind of at the beginning of my career, they weren't so helpful, because it was just everybody sort of finding their feet and almost doing that, the thing Korantema said, which is really good, and that like enforced friendship when you're in one place and you're in a situation where you will need to kind of lean on each other, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think my cup was very, very empty at that point. So being in those spaces of formalized networking where they're like, here you go, there's a bunch of you in a room, and kind of go talk to each other, for me that wasn't very helpful, because I felt like I had nothing to say. But the thing that really helped is to try not to just get stuck with one person. Try and have as flowing and natural conversations you can have with as many people. And one thing I started doing was setting myself a target of meeting 5 new people, or something like that, you know, or having a conversation with one person for at least 10 minutes, you know, just kind of goals that you can set so that it feels a bit more manageable and achievable, because they can feel quite daunting. But I think they're only really helpful to you, again, if you have that goal of meeting people and making connections with other people. And so I think it's important to know, when you want to go to these things, the thing you're looking to get out of it is some form of, you know, let's talk again, let's email again, or let's, you know, kind of have some sort of meeting again outside of this one setting, because otherwise it can be a lot of pressure to kind of be your best self and introduce yourself to as many people as possible. But then when you leave, if a week later there's kind of nothing that you've managed to make out of it for yourself, you know, more than anyone for yourself, then you're not going to feel fulfilled by those sorts of events. So I think that's what I'll add. And they're not all bad, you know, I'm kind of probably being dramatic, and they're not all awful.
Yeah, no, I really, really relate to that, just because I feel like formal quote unquote networking events kind of give me the ick, in the sense that I've definitely been to them, and it's been people coming up to you, like walking really confident and looking like they know what they're doing, and they're like, who are you? What do you do? Like, tell me about yourself. Like, very forward, like almost kind of like a, how are you going to be useful to me kind of thing. And I find that really hard to grapple with. I think I've gotten better at noticing when people do it, and not being fazed by it. But I think that for me, networking is like, I don't know. I ask the most like stupid stuff when I first meet someone. I'm like, hey, yeah, how are you? How's your day been? And then they'll mention like, oh yeah, I went to the cinema before, and I'll be like, oh, did you see me? Like literally just that kind of surface level conversation is just such an easy way to actually get into a sort of relationship with someone. Because I feel like, as you're saying, like if you come into it like, I'm going to be here to meet people, but specifically to like grow my network and like meet more like professional people, it's very easy to get in there and think that that's all you can talk about, and then that's when you come off as kind of like stiff and wooden and like, I'm here to be opportunistic, when actually like it's so fine to actually just talk to people as people first, because I guess everyone's kind of there to do the same thing and to grow their networks, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like such a transactional thing almost, if that makes sense. Yeah. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to say about their experience with networking? I mean, Jonathan, what have you got anything in mind?
Yes, I do, because I think in film and TV there's endless sort of screenings and premiere party type. I mean, they're not glamorous. You're basically in the basement of a hotel drinking horrible wine with people you don't like. So it's not always like, even if the photographs of it look really glamorous, the experience generally isn't. And I'm basically somebody who, I can host an event on the stage of the Barbican with 1,000 people in the audience and I'm fine. But you put me in a room talking to some strangers and I totally clam up and lose the will to live. But I think what I have found is that, in a way, if you want to seem interesting, just be interested. And I think Amy's right. What I tend to do is actually to really think through, okay, what are the questions that I want to ask people? Because actually, people love talking about themselves. So if you can go in with a sense of, okay, what's this situation? Who am I likely to meet? What are the things they kind of work in? What are the kind of things that they do? What kind of questions would they be interested in answering? They tend to think you're really smart. If you ask people smart questions, you don't really need to say very much. So what I try to do, I guess, strategically, is to go, right, I want to meet, like Silé was saying, I want to meet X number of people. These are the questions I want to ask from them. If I feel we've made a connection, then I'll go, oh, listen, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but, why don't we exchange numbers or whatever? And then I'll follow up, because I'm much, much happier just meeting someone one-to-one for coffee, after the thing when you're just yelling in someone's ear about nothing, hating yourself it's not a great way to build any kind of career.
Yeah, I've definitely gone to a networking event where it has just been sort of like really loud, like egregious music, and you're just stood there with like a little free wine and you're like, yeah, thank you for that. Just looking at the so many questions that have come through. Do we actually, Chloe, has there been any on the Q&A at all?
Sorry, no, there was one about one of the books that Silé was talking about, the F1 romance. Someone was interested in that, so I said maybe we could send them a copy. But other than that, no.
100%. Just drop your email maybe to someone, and then they can send it to me and I will send it to you. It's so great. I want everyone to read it, especially my copy, which has sprayed edges that look like a track. It's so cool.
No, I need that. Yes, please.
I'll make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to ask you about that. You've just reminded me. In terms of when you were talking about the books that you're working on, how does that process work? Like, do you get any sort of say or choice in the? You look
Yeah,
so
this
happy
is
to answer
buckle up,
this
everyone.
question.
It is every kind of process looks a bit different. Every book is slightly different. So this one I didn't get to show you guys because the camera cut out. Desified. This is a very, very different process to the Formula One romance, say. Although that was its own very specific case if she was about to self-publish it. But usually an agent will have some sort of inbox or website or something where they collect queries or submissions. They have lots of different names, but a writer will say, I've written a book and I want to have it published. And usually you need an agent to access the bigger publishing houses. You definitely need an agent to help you look over contracts because they are confusing. And depending on what the terms of them are, they can set you up for success or failure before you've even started. So you want someone who understands how to read them and how to help you navigate a career as an author. And that's kind of where I come in. So I'll get a manuscript that's been written by a writer, either a professional writer, you know, someone like Yomi who's written for other things before and articles and things like that, or someone who has literally just gone, I've loved writing my whole life and now I've made up this story and I need help. But whichever one it is, we'll connect and then I'll read it if I like it, because I kind of have to like it. I do have complete control over my list. Not everyone does, but most agents will build a list based on what they like. So everyone's will look different. Mine tends to be kind of marginalized voices, though not always, but always something different to add to a conversation is what I look for. So I love stories or fiction or nonfiction that that use kind of familiar tropes, like Formula One and love are very, very common things to write about, but rarely together. So having that was what made it appeal to me. And there are other people who it wouldn't necessarily appeal to, but that's the brilliance of everyone having their own sort of personal choice. And then I'll work with the author to get it to the best standard that it can be without a professional editor, because I don't count myself as a professional editor. I've done editing courses and I've been working in this industry for a long time, but that is not my job title. So then when it gets to the best possible version of it can be, I'll do a list of people, you know, anywhere from like 5 to 20 people, depending on the book and depending on the market and how many people are actually buying books in that area. I'll send it out to them. They'll consider it alongside their teams, and then they will offer a book deal. Essentially, if they like it, they'll offer an amount of money called an advance, which is paid out over 4 or 5 installments throughout the process of the book being published, and they'll offer me some terms, and then I'll usually go back to them and go, this is not enough money. These are not very good terms. Can you make them better? We'll go back and forth for a little bit, and then I'll present it to the author and say, do you like this person? Do you like this publishing house? And then, you know, what do you think of this deal? And then if they agree, we'll move forward. The editor will then do a professional edit on the book where they either rip it apart, put it all back together again, or they kind of do little tweaks. And then it will start the process of becoming an actual physical book, which is what you guys will end up picking up off the shelves. Which is a very, very like surface level overview of the whole thing, but that's generally speaking what I do and what most agents do.
Well, I have certainly learned something with that. So thank you for, you know, bracing yourself to explain that to us. The next question I think I'm going to ask is kind of based on things that seem to have come up in like the last bits of conversation that we've all talked about, particularly Silé, when you were talking about wanting to platform sort of marginalized voices and perspectives that don't often get heard. Somebody asked if any of you have any advice for how to advocate for yourself as a creative, especially if you're a minority. And someone else asked how you deal with racism and sexism. So Korantema, Yomi, Silé, I know that this is, you know, quite a heavy topic, but if any of you want to address this, I think it would be really valuable.
Yeah, I don't mind saying something on that. I feel like, honestly speaking, I feel like for me anyway, my personal experience, it actually genuinely has depended on what the situation is and like where I fit into it. So for instance, like as I mentioned, me and my best friend co-wrote a book, and all in that book we spoke a lot about navigating racism within the workplace. And I think we interviewed like 50 different women, 50 different Black women from different industries about their approaches to racism and sexism. And I think what we noticed was that a lot of the issues that women were experiencing within the workplace were very similar. That's like from young women that we interviewed that were like in their 20s, like we were then, all the way up to, you know, this legend called Margaret Busby, who was the first Black female publisher in the country, but also the youngest in the country as well. And she was kind of citing issues in like the 60s and 70s that like also young Black women that we'd spoken to in the book were also citing. I think what we kind of noticed was that lots of people took different approaches, and that was kind of I honestly don't think there's like a one size fits all, like catch all kind of approach. I think as well, like, I guess this is where the conversation really about like different types of privilege as well becomes quite like relevant, because I don't think necessarily that if you are a person working within a, like, I don't know, if you're like a slightly more senior person in like we are all on this panel, that is able to, I guess, hold somebody accountable in a way that maybe somebody who, you know, our example is always like, it's not necessarily the same if you're someone who's like working on a 0-hour contract and is like responsible for, you know, contributing to their parents' mortgage. I don't necessarily think it's like responsible for me to be like, you need to call it out right there and then, even though it's what I want to say. I do think that there are lots of different mitigating factors that mean that people have to respond to different things in different ways. And being completely realistic, like, I think when it comes to relying on things like HR, I think post like 2020, like, which was obviously quite a watershed moment in terms of conversation specifically about racism, things have gotten better. But again, I also know lots of people who've been massively failed by like HR and by, you know, their own institutions. I'd say the one thing that I think is always useful is receipts. I feel like things being put down in writing is like crucial. I think that's a way in which, like, when I was sort of coming up, something I definitely didn't know, like when there had been mistreatment, I'd noticed that, especially like weirdly actually in TV, like stuff that I'd done in TV, there was always like a want to get me on the phone as opposed to have conversations about what had gone wrong via email. And my kind of, you know, first point of call would always be to have discussions over email, because I like to kind of be able to like put down my thoughts and, you know, write about what happened and really feel like I could, you know, have it in a cohesive, like, you know, have it all down in one cohesive space. But the want was always to, let's have this discussion on the phone, because it's easier to kind of gaslight on the phone. It's easier to gaslight without witnesses. And also it's kind of harder to keep track of things if it's just like slightly less formal. So I would say that, like, just making sure that anything that you'd want to discuss, any issues you want to discuss, I'll put in writing first, is like really, really helpful. I also think what Korantema was saying about community, having people that you can like speak to, that WhatsApp groups, and having fellow like creatives and people that you can speak to about what approach you should take is really useful. Because I think there was a time, and I think it's like a generational difference as well. Like, I think like Gen Z are much better, I think, at calling stuff out, which I think is absolutely great. What I would also say though is that I guess there's a level of maybe caution that comes with my generation, whereas I've written a whole book about calling people out. So, you know, it's not like it's not something I'm for. I just think that part of the conversation that kind of went missing a bit was just privilege, just that there are people, not just race, like, I'm not talking just about like racial privilege in the racial context or gendered context. I'm talking about like, what is your financial situation? Like, if you are in a situation where you can afford to call something out in a very particular way, that and you know, really kind of blow the roof off of something, that tends to be because you are in a very stable position, which means that you're willing and able to walk away from that job or opportunity. I think what age has made me realize is that not everybody is in that position. And the times where I've been able to do that has honestly been because I lived at home with my parents. I wasn't like, you know, I was not in a situation which meant that I wasn't able to do that. So I think having other people that can kind of advise you, other Black people that can, or minoritized people that can be like, you can say, this is what's happening. How would you approach this? What do you think is the best way? Has always been really useful to me, because I know when I've been navigating really difficult situations in the workplace, my first point of call has always been to show my friends and be like, how, because I know, I wouldn't say I have a temper, but it's definitely like, I know that when something's like racist or sexist or, you know, both together, like my want is to immediately kind of just like call it out and, you know, be quite like forthright with it. But sometimes I've had friends, and it's kind of a less, I guess, inspiring or exciting part of the conversation, but I've had friends that have been like, you're gonna have to take this down a notch because you can't afford to lose this opportunity. And that's quite bleak, but that is honestly, I think, the world that we live in many ways. So I think for me, it's you must do something about it. I think sometimes it's just a scale in terms of like working out what exactly you can do about it, and bouncing that off with peers and seeing what they think, because they're going to have your best interests at heart. And I think sometimes Twitter's like, you just need to do a thread on this and like shout about it. And sometimes that is, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I've got results that way as well. I just think that sometimes it's like, it's a scale. That was like a long kind of, you know, meandering answer, but that's just me saying, I don't know. I think it depends on what has happened, basically, because there's microaggressions and then there's much more serious things that, like, I mean, microaggressions could be very serious in themselves, but there are other things which I think require different approaches. So ask your friends, I guess, is what I'd like to say also.
Yeah,
I
no,
wanted to add to that before. Sorry, Amy. I just wanted to add as well. Sometimes it's not just what you can do, but how to do it. 'Cause sometimes the immediate, I also have a temper, and that's why I love my job, because I get to lose my temper with people all the time on behalf of my authors, of course. But I am now in a kind of position where I'm not as easily replaceable as I was when I was an assistant, when I was in another industry where I was working sort of retail in front of house. And if I quit, and I did at one point, I left a job because I had just moved on, I'd got to my last year of uni, there was no kind of bad blood, but I was just ready to leave that job. And they replaced me within a week because that was the position. It's a very easily filled position. But now that's not the case. If I leave, I've got a list of authors, I've got, you know, lots of people who would miss me and not be able to do what I do, but that's because I've been doing it for years. And so now I'm in a much different position to be able to lose my temper with people than I was, you know, 10 years ago. But also, if I could give myself advice back when I first started, it's not that in a moment where someone said something to you or done something to you that you're like, hey, that's wrong, and it makes you feel icky inside, and you kind of go home and replay it in your head and go, oh, I should have said that, and I should have just, you know, done this, and I wish I had. Sometimes you can take those feelings and you can sort of put them in a box that you can open a bit later. So it's like playing the long game. The amount of people who really wronged me early on in my career, who I'm now just like, now I can tell you about yourself. Back then I couldn't, but now I can. And that can sometimes be even more satisfying and even more impactful. Like I say, now years later, I'm in a position where what I have to say matters to people, because what I have to offer or withdraw affects their bottom line. And now I'm in a position to affect the amount of money someone makes, or to affect how they're perceived in the industry. What I have to say has more weight. So now when I say the things that I wish I had said, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they have the impact that I wish they would have had 5, 6, 7 years ago. So sometimes it's also about knowing what kind of long game you can play, and if you intend to stay in an industry or stay in a job for a longer, you know, term than just kind of getting your foot in the door. If you want to stay in there for the rest of your career, then that's something you might want to consider as well. That it's like, okay, you might not be able to, oh, what is that phrase? It's like lose the battle, win the war. And that sometimes is, while you're in the process of winning the war, it feels really rubbish, but then like just trust that it will eventually come to pay off. Sorry, Amy, I know I cut you off.
I agree with literally everything that Yomi and Silé said. The last thing I wanted to add was like, it's never too early to join a union as well. For the things that are like, unions will check over like weird contracts and stuff. Like there'll be support there. So yeah, definitely join a union today.
Yeah, I massively endorse that. And thank you guys so much, all of you, for sharing your experience with that. Yeah, it's been really invaluable to hear in a number of ways. Without going into it too much, I've actually just kind of left a work situation that has been quite toxic. And I like to think I played the long game, in the sense that I left things on very amicable terms with them, but then it's come to light that some people were also treated very similarly. You know, like what you were saying, Yomi, with the group chats. Like, we have a group chat where we're like, oh crap, like this happened to you, this also happened to me, this is like really bad. And like, now I'm in a position where, because I have a new position, I'm a bit further removed emotionally from the situation, I can look back and be like, okay, here's how I want to deal with this, and like go about calling this out. I guess one thing I wanted to ask on the back of, I think, what you were saying, Yomi, is in terms of that privilege afforded to you of like being able to walk away from a situation if you're sort of stable enough. How I feel like there's levels to that, in the sense that I think for me, when I left my job, I definitely wasn't massively financially stable, but was stable enough that I felt like I could leave. But is there anything that we can do that, you know, if you don't feel able to leave, but like you feel like you absolutely have to get out and protect your mental health? Like, I don't really know what I'm asking here. I'm trying to formulate it into good words, just in the sense
I get
of
what
like,
you're saying, like what
yeah.
I guess, like, what circumstances aside from like financial privilege that can allow that type of like exit, maybe, like, because I feel like yeah, there are multiple things, as you said, like finances I think matter a lot. I think are often like overlooked in the conversations about like, you know, when you can get out. But there, I mean, you just made a really good point about mental health. Like, you know, you don't want to get to the point where you are so run down and so depressed about a situation that you're not able to work anyway, and you can't work anyway anywhere, let alone that place. So I think a lot of it, honestly, I think is about like checking in, as I've mentioned, like community a lot, but also checking inward and like working out what your like parameters are and what your like kind of like tolerances and I guess like as Silé was saying, like what do you want to get out of this opportunity? Is this a place that you plan on staying like forever? I literally just caught up with a friend earlier today who has been in the same working like environment for about like 5-6 years, and she has never liked working there. And I know that her, you know, we speak about it every single time that we meet up. She wants to do other things. She wants to write books. She wants to like, you know, go freelance. But her kind of thing that was holding her back, which I think is something that a lot of people from marginalized like groups can really identify with. It was more of a mental block as opposed to like her situation was fine. She knew that she could leave and be financially solvent, and she knew that she could leave and get other opportunities. But when you are told that you're not supposed to be somewhere in the first place, like she's a journalist, when you look around and there's no one else like you, she's kind of like she was almost made to feel lucky for being there in the first place. So for her, it felt like, how am I like you know, she knew in an intellectual way that she could have afforded to leave within 2 years, yet she stayed for 5, maybe even 6, because emotionally that wasn't true to her, because there was severe imposter syndrome. She felt like, well, you know, there are very few other young Black women working in a place like this. Therefore, if I leave, what, like, do you know what I mean? Who am I to leave, kind of thing? And I think that is a real thing that a lot of people, especially if you are like working class, especially if like you go into a space and you're the only state educated person, you're the only person who like, you know, didn't go to a particular uni, it really like it can almost feel as real and kind of as limiting as like any other real thing that would stop you from leaving. So I think like really like honestly having those like internal conversations as well about like really trying to understand like what it is that, you know, you want from this. Have you achieved what you wanted from this opportunity? I think again, always going back to receipts, I think like I guess this is just a broader conversation about like imposter syndrome, but like I remember having to, when I was writing Silé in Your Lane, me and my best friend / co-author were both in full-time work. She worked at a bank in, you know, the city, and I was working at Channel 4 News, and we were doing our full-time jobs and also writing our books at the same time, which isn't like the most uncommon thing, but it's quite difficult. And we both knew that, you know, we could have left. We had savings, we had like CVs that with lots of experience, but again, it was like this kind of mental thing of, oh God, like what if we leave and we're like unemployed forever? So a lot of what we were doing was that reassurance of like going back and honestly just rereading our CVs. And I know it sounds really basic, but honestly, like just having to like remind ourselves, like with the receipts of what we'd done and what we'd achieved, that we would actually be fine if we left. So yeah, I think it's a tricky one, but I think a lot of it really is personal. But I think also lots of it is trying not to, so difficult, like not to allow imposter syndrome to shape like your outcomes, because I know so many people who stayed in roles much longer than they should have, because even though they've been aware that they're really gifted and talented and they're good at what they do, there's just the fear of, you know, like lack of opportunity if they do leave, especially in this climate, especially within the creative industry where everything feels so precarious. And I think, again, speak to what Korantema said, joining a union is just absolutely crucial. Like I think that's like, I think again, if you're looking for something to give you that kind of like support, and just like if you want to feel, because you can feel really alone in scenarios like this, I feel like that is also like a really important thing. So yeah, I hope that's in some way answers the question.
No, it absolutely does. Thank you. That is really, really helpful to hear, for sure.
Can I jump
There's
in for a second, Amy? We've had a question
Yeah.
come through about how you, and if you do, take time to celebrate your wins and progress.
Yes, I love this question. Yes, it's so important. I never used to, because I come from a very, very working class background. I grew up with like all of the low income sort of parameters, I was like right in there. So I was always like up here. When I get here, that's when I'll start celebrating. And actually on the way, it's never a kind of straight line. And on the way to that, so many setbacks, and there's so many kind of little things that make you feel like you're not on track or you're not achieving stuff. So the second I started doing this, I was like, oh wow, I feel so much better. So I think everyone should do it, even if it's like getting out of bed when you're having a depressive episode and you actually manage to get out of your bed. That's a win. You should celebrate it, like go buy a nice coffee or, you know, something really, really proportionate but nice for yourself, or doing something nice for yourself. And one thing I always recommend is, I can't remember who it was who gave me this advice now, but it was writing a letter to yourself at the start of every new thing. So when I stopped doing it recently, I realized that I should have been due one this year. And I was like, oh, I just didn't write it when I had started my last job. So I kind of fell out of the habit. But writing something that's like, hey, you know, this is where I am now. This is where I hope to be by the time you person in the future is opening this. Like, you know, what changed? Because sometimes you're not where you expected to be, but that's because something happened or you made a decision along the way that changed what you wanted to do, and you're not ashamed of not being where you thought you were. But it's nice to be able to look back, and it's really hard to do that with your own memory because our memory's famously unreliable. So having an external thing that you can look at to say, you know, actually I've come really, really far, and okay, I have problems now and I have things that I'm dealing with now, but they're different to what I was dealing with a year ago or 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And seeing that growth and change in yourself can really be like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm really upset now about my car breaking down, but you know what, 5 years ago I was desperately trying to pass my test, so at least now I have moved on in some way, and it might not be perfect, but I'm not where I was. I'm not stagnant and I'm not stuck. And then on the occasions where I have opened it and gone, oh, I'm still in the same job I didn't want to be, or I'm, you know, still doing this, and it's like, oh, okay, well, why am I? Was it a conscious decision? Did I do this on purpose? Did I say no, I actually want to stay? Kind of like what Yomi was saying, like internal sense check can also happen when you're just consciously celebrating the things that you've achieved. So I always recommend it. And I saw this on TikTok, which I'm going to do next year, is buying a lot of those Aldi, like little £2 bottles of Prosecco, and they're like that big, they're like a glass and a half, and writing something on them. Soak off the label, write something on it, so that when you achieve that thing, you get to pop the little bottle of Prosecco. And I'm so excited to do it. I'm saving it to next year, so it can be like a New Year's resolution kind of thing, so I can justify like the £20 spend or whatever it's going to be to buy all the little bottles at once. But it doesn't even have to be that, you know, if you don't drink, if you don't, like, there's something you could do. It could be like a little bottle of a little packet of jelly babies, or, you know, a little kind of bottle of your favorite drink of that moment, little can of Ribena or whatever, just something that you look forward to. I think that's the key, is that you look forward to it. So when you do achieve something, you have something to look forward to make you feel like you've achieved it, because there's so much going on in the world that constantly makes us feel crap. So having that celebration is so important. It's my favorite. Thank you to whoever asked this question. It's a great question.
Can I just add to that? Like that is like the best idea ever. Like I'm definitely like already like going to be straight to Aldi after this. That's such a lovely idea. But I think like, yeah, like that's actually something that I'm really big on. I love like celebrating all my wins, big and small. And I think given like the imposter syndrome and all this other stuff, it is actually something I'm really quite intentional with. And I feel like it's because like when you're in certain spaces as someone who, you know, is from a particular background, you're made to feel like you're not supposed to be there. But I remember like, I can't actually remember why I started thinking like this. I don't know who said it or what I saw or what I read, but like once I became kind of conscious of the fact that like, actually the fact that I am in this space and have defied whatever odds to be in this space and have surmounted whatever hurdles to be in this space, actually, when I started to see that as making me feel like more deserving of being able to take up that space, you know, in theme of this panel, I felt like, my God, like I have potentially more reason to celebrate, for instance, when I was at university and stuff, than like loads of other people. That's not to in any way diminish like the achievements of people who didn't come from like minoritized or marginalized backgrounds. But I think that's the thing, is that we're so often taught to see our acceptance into particular spaces as luck or as something to be grateful for, and that really keeps us in particular spaces that we shouldn't be in. But then when you realize that actually, you know, I remember speaking to somebody like years ago at dinner who was trying to, he was a lawyer and he was essentially trying to make it so that like if you were on free school meals and from a single parent household, your B at A level was basically equivalent to somebody's who'd got like an A and was not on, like wasn't on school meals and had gone to private school. And he was really breaking down what, like, how much more difficult it is when, I don't know, let's say you're somebody who's really operating within like really difficult circumstances. And I remember, like, when I was younger, as someone who wasn't on free school meals but had like bailiffs at the door, like how much that would actually like take me out of my mind when trying to work at school. And I think like realizing that, hang on a minute, we've actually worked incredibly hard to get here, as opposed to the opposite of, oh, you're lucky to get here. And it's like, no, actually, you've worked very hard to reach these goals. It really made me realize that like every small win is very much worth celebrating. I wish it's something that we did more. Please don't mind me. I'm going to move because my battery is low, so I'm going to have to charge my computer. Don't mind me. Yeah.
That is so true. Like, I've also heard someone say something similar. That was actually, if you think about all the steps you had to take to get to where you are now, like you should be celebrating yourself every day. And I'm really bad at reflecting. I'm usually just like, go, and then once you've done it, you're like on to the next thing. But it's really important, if you can, to like carve out time to do that. Actually, Caris, who used to work at Arts Emergency, sent me this little book called Year Compass, and you print it out every year. And it makes you like go through every month, like you just write down the sort of things that you did, like the good things that happened, the bad things that happened, the things that you wish like you had done. And then it like closes that chapter of the year for you. And then it makes you do the next year. And like, so it makes you like celebrate your wins, like you can like draw little pictures. That's really nice. And then the next year you can give yourself like, you basically like manifest like a word for the year, and then it makes you like write down your little goals. It's amazing. And I started doing it a few years ago, and it really made me like properly stop and think about like all the things that happened. I was like, oh yeah, that I forgot about that, or like, oh, that was really nice. It's a really great practice. So yeah, I think we should definitely be trying to do it as much as possible.
I'm stealing that as well, Korantema. Between the Aldi Prosecco and the Year Compass, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be a good 2025.
Yeah, I've literally been like scribbling down notes from what you've all been saying. Like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Yeah, such good ideas, and really important to share. I think, as you say, like, I think being disabled and like having a chronic illness, I think sometimes I'm really hard on myself, because in my head I'm like, oh, you should be doing more, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But actually, when you consider that, like, so for me, I literally have to be reminded by other people that having something like diabetes is a 24/7 job on top of just being a person. So like actually being able to hit certain milestones or be where I want to be is like so arbitrary, when like you do have so much extra to deal with, whatever that may be. As you say, like if you come from a position of being marginalized in whatever situation, like just recognizing that it's not that you're lucky to be somewhere and it's not a fluke, it's actually because you've put in the graft, and you've put in probably more graft than somebody that's not had to deal with those kinds of barriers. So yeah, thank you so much, all of you, for talking to that. I think that's super important. Yes, Rose has just put in the chat, if you have any questions for the panel, please add them into the Q&A function. Please do that, because we are going to be wrapping up soon. So if we have any final questions, I would love to get them to you guys. I actually had a super quick one as well, that somebody asked. And I was wondering, Jonathan, you might be a good guy to address this one, because you were talking a lot about, I think it was something that Yomi said about like the difference between like book writing and sort of screenwriting and television writing being so collaborative and like multivocal. And this question was sort of talking about how to handle your voice not being heard or being sort of shut down by the people around you. Have you dealt with that? How do you deal with that?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. I think yes, I guess in film you can feel very alone, I think, because it tends to, essentially what happens is a producer commissions the writer to write the script, and that might be your own idea that you've pitched, but it's more often a producer has bought the rights to a book or to a character, and then you're kind of invited in. Basically, a bunch of writers go in and pitch how they would turn that into a movie, and if you get the job, hooray for you, very important, celebrate, get the Aldi Prosecco, have a good time, and then get into it. But then you can actually feel very alone, because essentially you're, I'm basically spend my day in my kitchen writing the thing for a month or 2 months or whatever, and then you send it off, and then you have notes, and then there's another draft, and you send it off, and you have notes. But that period can feel quite lonely. TV is a bit different, because normally you have a script editor who's kind of there, kind of alongside you. So you've always got somebody you can ring up and go, Amie, I'm really stuck. Like, I don't know what to do with this character, or this scene isn't working. I think in terms of taking up space, what I've learned is just to ask the questions, and if you get stuck, to admit that you're stuck and ask, because the more it's like, if you try and hide it, actually what happens is it tends to get worse. So I've sort of try and make myself flag up a question or an issue as early as possible, because then you can fix it more easily. I think in terms of being in the room, it is really difficult, because, and maybe even more in film, because in TV, generally the author is kind of very involved, and you're an exec producer, and you have generally there's a kind of level of control. In film, the writer really has very little control. And so there's this weird thing where, on the one hand, it's like, literally none of you people would have jobs if I didn't write this thing. Like, none of this money would have been raised if I hadn't written this thing. And yet somehow I feel like the least important, most junior person on the team. And also, by the way, I'm the easiest one to fire, right? So in film, you can get fired at any time in the process. So I think, again, what I try to do is, I suppose, remember what the things are that I do control, and the things that I'm the expert in. Like, I know these characters better than anybody. I know this story better than anybody. I know this world. And also, the tone of this film is my tone. So, all of that money came in because people read the script. They like the tone of it. They like the characters. They like the story. So it's kind of important to remember that you are important. But I think, in a way, going back to what Silé was saying, it's also about choosing the battles and the war. And I guess it's really recognizing this is the area that I am expert in. And so I will sort of demand space to be heard in this area. But then there's other areas where I think you do have to go, all right, you know what, I'm not the expert in this bit. I can afford to step back here. But I think, you're not lucky to be in the room. They're lucky to have you. And it's important to remember that, when you can just feel like you're the kind of marginalized outsider, when you're like, I literally made up this world, these people, these characters, and I think specifically the tone, because that's what absolutely no one else could have written this story in this way. And it's really important to remember that, that was you, and that, that will never change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it was a really, really lovely thing to hear. So yeah, thank you. I think that's really nice, because it's something that, although you're talking quite specifically about like film and TV and the tone of something, I guess I was just thinking about how it relates to me in terms of the different like community arts projects I like to work on and facilitate and stuff. And when you're recognizing what you've brought to something, it is all about like, okay, this is me as a person, this is my heart, this is what I care about, and the specific way that I see the world is specific to me. And that's the reason they brought me on, because they appreciate this. So like, I need to trust myself in that, you could have somebody else that would have a different vision, and that would probably be like a nice vision, but also like mine matters. And like, I have to try to tell myself that quite a lot. So yeah, that really resonated. Thank you. Chloe, do we have any other Q&A questions?
We don't.
Oh. So I am conscious of time. So before we wrap up, I am gonna end with probably the cringiest and most predictable question in the book.
Can I say, before you do, there was one question
Yeah.
I was really hoping you'd ask it. I can't remember who asked it now, but it was, how do you fight the voices in your head? And I was like,
go for it.
I love this question. I really love to know what everyone else on the panel thinks as well. But for me, it's only recently changed to actually physically fighting, like, but doing things that take you out of your head. I think it's so easy to forget how the lessons of lockdown, now the world's gone back to normal, of moving, like physically moving. So if something is stressing you out and you're very in your head about it, go for a walk, I've started going swimming, and it's like that's a big challenge in itself. Like there's a lot of boundaries I've had to kind of overcome to be able to actually go, I'm going to go swimming twice a week and stick to it. But things like that are so helpful, and I wish I had done them earlier at the start of my career, and just found something that was really cheap to do. I think it's important that it's not a huge financial commitment, or ideally completely free, like literally going for a walk, even if it's raining, even if it's cold. Like there are loads of barriers and things that are going to get in the way of you doing that, but the difference that it makes in tackling those like really, really unhelpful voices in your head. So I did want to say that, because I don't think anyone said that to me, and hobbies have always seemed like a really kind of frivolous middle class endeavor, and something that people only do when they have money to spend. And like, it's not a waste of time to do something that just makes you feel good. You don't have to make money from it, you don't have to spend money on it if you can avoid it. Like even baking is going to cost you ingredients or equipment, but something that you can do that just takes you out of your job and out of your trying to survive in this very, very capitalist world. Something that brings you joy and is physically involved can be like honestly life-changing. But I wanted to say that, like, I don't know if that resonates with anyone, how you seem to.
Yeah, like honestly, I feel like everything you've just said is just, yeah, it resonates so much. Like it was very much during lockdown that I like kind of learned about the value of walking and just being physically active. I think like as someone who grew up like quite slim, I think you're taught that like exercise is only valuable if it's to lose weight. And I had never in my life like bothered being like a physical person. So I started walking during lockdown for mental health, and then kind of stopped doing it because obviously, as Silé said, the world went back to normal. And then now I've only just started like walking again, and I'm like, wow, this is such a revelation. Same thing with art. Like as you can see, like I love art, and some of the paintings on the wall, not many of them, but like there's a little green one up there, like I did during lockdown. And I love to paint, it's like a big hobby of mine. But we're taught that like, there's no value in something if you aren't monetizing it. That's what capitalism basically tells us. So pre-lockdown, I probably hadn't painted for like a decade, even though that's my real hobby and I'd say skill, like more so than even writing. Like I love painting, but I've never wanted to do it for money. And I think I was kind of taught by society that it was worthless because it wasn't something I wanted to do for money. And I think we really have to push back against that. Like, the value of something just bringing you joy, like it sounds so like, of course you can say it's more important than money if you are financially stable, but I do think that it is so important and so underrated. And I just was like, everything Silé was saying, I was like, this is so true, and something that I think we're losing a little bit post lockdown. And it's quite sad to see that like the lessons we learned aren't really sticking. So I really think it's important that we talk about it.
I don't want to go too much into capitalism, but what you were saying about doing things just for joy, like not for money, like hobbies especially, like 1000%, but also like doing something that you don't. I think I've always been quite like I have to be like excellence, like you have to work really, really hard, like you have to be like the best of the best, but like, oh my god, like doing something that you're actually quite bad at, and then you have to like learn. It's actually really fun and freeing. Like those like intrusive thoughts are like, oh, but you're like, okay, so I've been doing like knitting and crocheting and I'm so shit, or sorry, I'm so bad at it, but I find it really enjoyable just like trying to figure it out, and it's not going to go anywhere because I have basically zero skill, but it's just like a really fun little thing to do. And I think just like, yeah, taking yourself out of that mindset of having to like really achieve and like progress, like no, just be mediocre sometimes, it's okay.
I just wanted to jump in super quickly and ask you about that in terms of your relationship to dancing, because I, like, whether I present as it or not, I'm quite a self-conscious person and I get in my head so much, and particularly when it comes to my body and my body image, I deliberately do not dance unless I'm like drunk, to be honest, because I'm just like, oh my god, I look terrible, what am I doing, why do I look like this? And like when I actually do make the effort to move my body in a joyful way for the sake of doing that, it feels incredible, but I just don't do it enough because that voice in my head is like, you look like an idiot, stop. So like, I just wonder if that's anything you've ever had to like deal with dancing, and like if you overcame that in any way.
Yeah, totally. I think what's been nice about my dance journey is that I didn't do dance, I didn't study it. And I think if you study dance in the kind of, in those dance schools and institutions, I think it can produce quite a difficult relationship that you have with your body and also with movement. But I sort of came in through dance through, I mean, I love to dance, like I love going out and dancing, like my friend. I mean, I don't do it anymore, obviously, because I'm tired and I like to sleep at 9. But I'm like, you know, I like to go out and just like dance and move because it feels like joy. And so I came through dance sort of in that way, like in like social dancing. And I think the best way of trying to like rekindle that joy that you have is just doing it when lots of people around you are also feeling lots of joy. And there was lots of spaces like that as well. Like it might not be in a formal setting. It might just be at a party, it might be just like in your room, like all those things are like completely like valid, but like, yeah, I think moving your body is, yeah, it can really, I think, put you back to yourself and like put you back in touch with yourself. I think that's really important. Yeah, dance in your room, like no, like I never say like no one's watching, but it's actually true. It's really fun.
Yeah, I think this applies to so many things, but I think we as people are so like self-conscious and self-interested in a way, in the sense that like we always think people are watching us or like judging us or thinking about us, and actually like nobody thinks of you as much as you think about yourself, and that is just kind of a fact. So yeah, I think that's probably like a really important lesson I've had to learn. But yeah, I wanted to ask actually, did anyone read a question that I sent over and they were like, oh, you've not asked this and I really wanted you to ask it. Like if you want to speak to it in any way, no, honestly, it's so valid. If you do want to speak to it in any way, please do, now's your time.
Nothing else on my side. Excellent question.
I think it's maybe not, yeah, I guess it is actually related to the combating doubt. I think one of the things that's very difficult in a lot of arts jobs is that on the one hand, you have to be very vulnerable and kind of emotionally open in order to do the job, right? In order to write a story, paint a picture, do a dance, you have to make yourself very vulnerable. But at the same time, you have to be really tough to navigate some of the career stuff because you've got meetings with scary people. You know, you will be rejected more than you're commissioned. You have lots of quite tough meetings. And I think I do tend to, I guess, almost think before, you know, like a meeting or a Zoom call or whatever, which version of myself do I need to be? Like, is this one where I need to be like, put the Batman suit on and go in and kick butt? Or is this one where I can be very kind of emotional and open and kind of vulnerable? And it's useful to make a distinction before going into those situations as to which version of yourself you kind of need to be. Because I think if you, so I sort of just find it quite helpful to be kind of pre-prepared in a way for what this meeting or this situation might be like. I think the other thing, just in terms of kind of taking up space and owning your role in that room, is that I've got much better at saying at the beginning of a project, look, I'm going to send you the script or the book or the pitch or whatever it is. I like to receive feedback in terms of emails and then have a conversation rather than just have the conversation. Or some people are the other way around. Some people just like a meeting. I think figuring out how you want feedback to happen and telling the other person how you want that to be actually makes a really big difference. And quite often they just go, okay, fine, all right. You know, so I think trying to set the boundaries that you need in those situations can make a real difference. Because and again, I tend to be really open about saying, look, these are the things that I'm not easily hurt by. These are the things I am quite easily hurt by. So let's be quite sensitive about this, and we can be really straightforward about this. And I do think, like, you know, you don't have control over what's going to happen, but you do have some control over the kind of the rules and the boundaries that you can set for those relationships. And actually, generally, people are quite open about that if you do that kind of early enough in the process. So I found that really helpful, but I wish I'd learned that, you know, a long time ago.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I am gonna rush through this slightly quickly because we are sort of over time. My final question for you all was if you can keep it to maybe a word if you can, but a sentence at the absolute max. What does taking up space mean to you? Just feel free to jump in whenever someone wants to go first.
I would say, this is not one word, sorry, but it'll be short. I would say that, like, I can't remember who said it now, but kind of the idea of taking up space, not just being about like individualism and like being able to take up space as a community. Like, I've learned so much. I love working with arts and emergency so much because honestly, this panel, I feel like I've been taking notes from what everyone's been saying. And I think that to me is just what taking up space is about, like being able to do it with people.
For me, I think it became about confidence, and that confidence of my own ability rather than whatever sort of external validation I was seeking. So just taking up space by knowing that I'm here to do what I can do and not to do something for the applause of others, really sort of changed my outlook on it.
I was thinking my 3 things, similarly to what Yomi was saying, was doing it with other people, just trying and not being afraid to fail.
Yeah, I think all of those make a lot of sense. I think it is being confident. I think it's knowing why you're there, knowing that you've earned that place, and in a way, before going into that space, going, why do I deserve to be here? And I'm not going to back down on that area. But I think also one of the great things is being able to create space for other people to share with you. And so it's also about knowing when to kind of give up space and put someone else in the spotlight. And that can be so valuable, and you can learn so much by doing that. And, I've learned so much from my arts emergency mentees and community, and from all of the young people we work with and met over the years. It's been such an absolute joy and an honor. And obviously it's how I met all of you guys. It's really nice, by the way, to see you all. And thank you for this. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been so nice being on this panel, honestly. Thank you for making it happen.
No, thank you guys for being here. Honestly, like, it has been so nice from my perspective to chat to everybody and pick your brains. Yeah, really special, and I'm really thankful you guys chose to give up some time of this sunny day to be here. And that goes to the audience too. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Just to remind you all that we are doing a prize draw for the people that have come today. So you have a chance to win a £50 voucher. We'll be doing that next week. So keep an eye on your inboxes to see if you've won that. And also keep an eye on your mailboxes, because we will be sending a little thing out in the post to say thank you for coming today. So from me and from the rest of the Youth Collective, thank you to our wonderful panellists. Thanks to everybody that's come. And thanks to my Youth Collective for making this possible and giving me a space to just chat to people for an hour and a half. It's been really nice.